Good morning, folks. Welcome and happy Saturday. Saturday morning here in San Diego, doing another open office hours where y'all can ask me whatever questions you want. Chris, that's right. Good afternoon, party people. Steve, good to see a lot of the regulars in here. Howdy, folks. Today will be a little shorter than normal. I'll only do 1 hour because we have a mattress coming. We're getting a new mattress before we move to Iceland, and so we got to go get or have that dropped off, so it's kind of cool. I tell you what, I'm such a huge fan of Tempur-Pedic mattresses. I totally sound like an old person now. I am an old person, but wow, Tempur-Pedic mattresses are just freaking amazing. So the way that office hours work is that you can ask your question, just only ask it once. I'll copy paste it into a little queue thing here that we track all the questions in, and I'll work through first come, first serve. But just be aware that if you ask it multiple times, I'm just going to simply ignore it. I won't even look at it. So just be polite and ask your question once, and then off we'll go. I'll go ahead and copy a couple of questions that have come in from over on YouTube. So let's see here from YouTube. Got this one, and then this one over here. Copy and paste from YouTube. Put that over there. And then let's go get these into the queue, and then go go add these in and go see how we go. So the first one up from YouTube, Orbit asked, if my transactional database depends too much on TempDB, what's the best way to make it more optimal to handle write workloads? Don't ask why that is. The dev did this way. It depends too much on TempDB, optimal to handle write workload. So I'm not even sure what you're asking. Like, my guess is that you're trying to ingest a lot of data into TempDB. Well, the cool thing is since like SQL Server 2012, Microsoft has had all kinds of improvements on TempDB where they don't write to disk unless it absolutely has to. You can kind of think of it as like an in-memory database as long as you have enough RAM. So there's an odd question or an odd answer that's going to sound weird. Get as much RAM as you can. So for example, if you're going to be working with 20, 30 gig tables in TempDB, you probably want like 128 gigs worth of RAM because you want to be able to cache data and cache execution plans and do as much caching over in TempDB as you can. Memory is so much cheaper than fast storage. You know, even standard edition holds 128 gigs of RAM as a starting point. So yeah, Adam, I think that's kind of overkill. I would just stick with standard edition, at least 128 gigs of RAM. Because too, usually when people say transactional databases, usually they're talking about stuff that's like under half a terabyte in size. You can totally do transactional databases that are higher. It's just less usual to see. Next up we have, let's see here, let's clear out a couple of things inside here. Says, Brent, can you mirror a database between servers that are in different domains that don't have a trust between them? Yes! One of the awesome things about mirroring is that there's no domain stuff required at all. There's a book on database mirroring by Robert Davis, and I know what you're probably thinking. You're like, how can there possibly be a book on database mirroring? That's what I thought too until I read it, and then I was like, oh yes, you actually could write an entire book just on database mirroring. And it's not thick, it's pretty thin. I want to say, if I remember right, it's like 200 pages, but they give you a walkthrough. The author, Robert Davis, who's passed away, bless his soul, has gives you a walkthrough on how to do that exact thing. So it's really useful, quite slick. Next up, Rye Man says from over on YouTube, what's the best source control? Adam B. Oh, that's pretty good. You have to buy 2 copies. Ryman says, what's the best source control tool for SQL Server? I actually don't do source control. I use it as a consumer, but like it to choose which tool is the best, I couldn't tell you. The person that I would ask is Alex Yates of DLM Consultants. So if you go to dlmconsultants.com, DLM is in Data Lifecycle Management Consultants.com, He is a community member who's pretty active, and he can point you to. Richie says, "Answer it." See, as Richie's our developer here at brentozar.com, and Richie, I would pose that to you. What do you think is the best source control tool for SQL Server? Because see, neither of us really do any development on SQL Server backends anymore. It's not that I don't. I take. The way that I phrase it is that I take money off the table for SQL Server. I just don't tend to put as much back in. Like I do performance tuning in it and architecture, but I just don't do, if I was going to build a brand new app from the ground up, I tend to steer away from SQL Server. Not that it's bad, it's awesome. I just don't build enterprise applications. I tend to build software as a service type stuff. Next up from YouTube, Ryan asks, how would you build a database with hundreds of terabytes worth of data? Would you use multiple SQL Server instances? I wouldn't use SQL Server. I know that's going to kind of get me in trouble with my audience. But if you're talking about, if you know from the ground up that you're going to have hundreds of terabytes of data, then you're probably going to eventually have petabytes of data because it's not that big of a jump from hundreds of terabytes to petabytes. SQL Server just isn't designed for that. You can use it, but it's just like trying to use a hammer to get a screw in. It just doesn't really make sense at that scale. There are tons of data warehouse appliances, cloud platforms. You know, you talk about things like Azure Data Warehouse, Redshift. There are all kinds of tools that specialize in that kind of thing. Now, let's say that a client, just because it's fun, is a thought exercise. Let's say that, God, that's terrible too. Let's say that someone came to me and they said, we have a 50 terabyte data warehouse and it's growing to say 200 or 300 terabytes. The 50 terabyte one is already in Microsoft SQL Server, and we're expecting it to grow to 200 terabytes before the time that we can migrate it off to something else. Then you start talking about of always-on availability groups because you want to be able to do your loads on the primary, but then scale out to like half a dozen or more replicas that can do reads. Doing inserts cross SQL Server, that's a giant pain in the rear, and I wouldn't go there with a data warehouse, but an always-on availability group is a good starting point to do your loads on the primary and then do your reads scattered across secondaries. Because queries across hundreds of terabytes of data are just never going to be tight index seeks. They're going to be big, ugly table scans, and you're going to want a lot of storage throughput and a lot of CPU in order to accomplish it. I think my biggest client doing a data warehouse on SQL Server right now is about 25 terabytes. And you're talking about an environment that takes 3 full-time DBAs continuously doing care and feeding of it. You know, so it's pretty hard stuff. It's doable. It's just a little bit more of a pain in the rear. Next up, let's see. Let me copy a few ones that came in from over on. That's true. Adam's absolutely right there. From YouTube, there's one. Let me add that in. Let me get a couple of other ones that came in over on YouTube. Let me copy paste that off. And from YouTube, copy paste this over here. And copy paste this over here. And from YouTube. And paste that in. Now let's get these into the thing. Copy, 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 and copy. All right, there we go. So next up we have G Surgeon from the Netherlands. Hey, represent. Yeah, Cool Stout says no surly dev this morning. Yeah, he totally volunteers, so it's hit or miss when he's here. Slacking on admin duties. G-Surgeon says, SB Blitzcast showed me 5 plans for the same stored procedure, all with the same set options, same SQL handles, same different plan handles. What am I missing? So it could be that they're running in different databases, like if people are running them fully qualified and they're jumping across different sessions. I know that you said they have the same set options, and I hear you, but often that's not actually the case. I'm imagining other things that, to find out, here, I'll show you where to go look. So when you want to see where to go look, go over to Google and search for Erland Sommerskog, slow in the app, fast in SMS. So if you search for slow in the application fast in SSMS, Erland has a whole page full of stuff that causes it. I have to warn you before I click on it, it looks like Craigslist's web designer, but here you go. So here it has a little table of contents over here, and he has a whole section on different plans for different settings, the default settings, all kinds of good stuff like that, and other things that cause that same thing that we're talking about there. Next up, let's see here. Partha Package says, what's the best option to perform maintenance for column store object table size around 700 gigs? It turns out I have a class for that. That's the wrong button. That's the button I wanted to do. So I have a class for that. My fun to that exact thing. Now it does take about half an hour, 45 minutes in order to fully explain it. That's why it's part of the class. All my classes are on sale right now over at brentozar.com/Black Friday. So you can go over there and hit the fundamentals of column store class. That's an interesting label that somebody picked there. Fundamentals of column store class, and I teach you that, plus why you have to do things like partitioning objects that are dozens or hundreds of gigs in column store, so that you can then go on and do maintenance on them easier. So there you go. Next up, Ernesto from, I believe, Mexico City. Good to see you. Says, a friend who's not here needs to know how to prorate. Well, next time, make sure that your friend shows up. Seems like a fair choice. A friend is not here, needs to know how to prorate the cost of an instance and RDS for each database. Oh, so really that's the same as a regular SQL server. How do you gauge the cost of each database on a SQL server? So I've got clients who've done this, and I'm going to give you several examples of how you could do it. You could do it by database size. You could do it by workload, like measure how much workload has been used by each database. Resource Governor is a great use of that. You can use Resource Governor in Enterprise Edition to group people together or to group applications together. And then Resource Governor has built-in reporting tools that you can use as well. You can use some guy, whatever you're doing there, you just got yourself a ban. So congratulations, you are blocked. So those are the two places that I would start with is the plan or Resource Governor, and then the charging by database size would be the two easiest ways to go do it. Next up, our Leaper says, what's the best way to update stats on a giant table if the job may not finish in the maintenance window? You don't need to take the server down in order to update stats. Updating stats just reads a lot of data. It only writes one 8K page per stat, so it's not like it's that bad. Now it is resource intensive in terms of reads, but don't think that you have to get like take the server down to do it. So just go ahead and keep doing update stats. All right, Kareem, that's not true. No, the person was spamming. So I'm real careful about spamming around here. Listen to y'all, you're crazy. From YouTube, Steve asks, what method would you recommend for keeping the agent jobs related in a mirror database in sync between the two mirror instances? So let me tell you what the theory is. The theory is that you're going to have the exact same jobs on every replica, because it's the same thing whether you're dealing with database mirroring or always on availability groups. The theory is that you're going to have exactly the same agent jobs everywhere, and that the first step in the job is going to check to see whether or not that job should run. In reality, what I often find is that people need different jobs on different replicas. For example, on your backup target or on your disaster recovery replica, you may have different configurations for things like file paths, and people don't always drive them from a database the way that they probably should. So I don't see a lot of people keeping the exact same jobs in sync. If you want to, go pick up that same book on database mirroring by Robert Davis that I mentioned, and he has approaches to do that. It's kind of the song as old as time. Nothing about that has changed across the last 10, 15 years, so you can use it based on the stuff in his book. Next up, Georgie from YouTube says, is the SQL Server Management Series or SQL Server Execution Plan Viewer better in any way than the Century 1 Plan Explorer? If not, then why doesn't Microsoft implement the latter? Is a Ferrari better than the car you drive? Oh, it is. Then why aren't you driving a Ferrari? Oh, because you don't have the money. I see. It would be interesting if we could all just live like Grand Theft Auto. Go walk out on the street, punch whoever's driving the car that we want, go get in off and take it. But it's really weird. People don't seem to react that well in real life to people doing that. So there's kind of the answer to your question in a roundabout, goofy way. Pahindra says, I've installed the latest security patch on SQL Server 2014 successfully. So it's 2020. Okay, all right. But I was unable to see the latest version on Management Studio. I'm able to see the... I'm guessing that, I'm not quite sure there. I'm guessing that maybe you didn't restart the instance. Maybe it needed to be restarted after the patch. I would probably start there, go restart the server and go from there. Next up we have Hasamdaba. Hasamdaba says, we have 3 SQL Server instances on one VM. Oh, you have a clown car. Oh, you're packing lots of clowns into the car. We have one VM with 8 logical cores. What would be the best configuration regarding of number of TempDB files for each instance? Oh, great. Okay, so that's fair. The thing I would just say is, you're running... I'm going to go grab something just for comparison. You're running 3 SQL servers on something with 8 cores. I'm going to go grab something that's got 8 cores just for comparison so that we keep this in perspective. So this right here is my iPad. So you're saying you run 3 SQL servers on here. I see. And you're worried about the number of TempDB files. I see. I would not be, but for starters, just put 4 data files on each of them. Just know that this isn't going to be enough to get you across the finish line. You're packing a lot of clowns into that car there. So, next up. I know I'm terrible, aren't I? I'm just a bad individual. CTI Geek, good to see you again, says we have some pretty simple stored procedures that do some ETL. I prefer to use temp tables. My predecessor set up permanent tables in its own schema. Is there a disadvantage to using temp tables if the size of data is not too big? So the advantage of permanent tables is usually restartability. So if you want to be able to restart a process that failed halfway through, it's way easier with permanent tables than it is with temp tables. Because of course, it's impossible with temp tables. The gotcha on that, of course, is that permanent tables suffer from all the logging problems and backup space. You know that they're actually changing data pages inside the data file. So I am with you in that I really like temp tables. And when I say temp tables, I mean literally in TempDB, like not even scratch tables that I replace in a user database. Because if you put the tables in a user database, they have problems with logging to the transaction log, plus they're changing data pages in the data file, which means that they make your backups larger, your log backups, your differential backups, all that stuff. So I'm with you. I would go temp tables, but that's the reason that people do it in permanent tables, restartability for their ETL processes. All right, let's copy paste a few of the other questions over into... Adam says, I put the staging tables in a different database to not have logging. Well, the database is going to have logging though, right? So next, let's add a few more of these from Facebook. Copy that one in there. Let's see here. Copy this in here. Copy from YouTube. Boom. And then copy this in. From YouTube. Boom. And then anything else, we'll grab this one, copy, and then paste. Oh, we got a few. Oh, several good ones. I should have played music in the background while I do this. Copy, and then from YouTube, paste, and then this one. Last one we'll do in there, copy, and from YouTube. Paste that in. Now let's go add these into the queue. And there those go in. And then copy that, and copy that. Okay, good. I think I got everything there. Alan asks, are you planning on adding any availability group training in the future? No. So the thing is, I don't like dealing with broken SQL servers. At the end of the day, when you're doing high availability and disaster recovery, what your job is, Books, we're not gonna, I don't know what a cookie logger is, and please don't ever ask the question twice. Asking the question twice is, like we talked about earlier, a very quick way to make sure that your comments don't show up again. So we'll just take care of that so that you don't show up again. Surly Deb's here. Hey, oh, very cool. Or it sounded like he was. We'll see if he actually is. The thing with availability groups is that you're constantly dealing with broken SQL servers. After all, people don't put in availability groups unless something is mission critical. It's got to be up all the time. And then whenever it breaks, they want to call you and get you on the phone right away. I like being drunk. I like being able to walk out of my office on Friday afternoons or whatever day I choose to walk out of here. Someday I'll be able to walk out of here and not have to deal with a bunch of broken SQL servers. And for me, availability groups was just a bucket of heartache because the thing breaks all the damn time. They are so unreliable. They're supposed to make your infrastructure more reliable, but there was a really funny joke, and I can't remember who said it, if it was Nick Craver or if it was, yeah, exactly. If it was Nick Craver, if it was Jeff Atwood that said at Stack Overflow for whatever year it was, like 2013, 2014, our only point of downtime was our high availability system. Like always on availability groups was the single cause of all our downtime for like a year straight. I love it. It's phenomenal. Adam says availability group means always on for the DBA. I think that's a pretty good way of saying it. So for that, like I just decided I wanted to make a career choice to get away from that I didn't want to be the 24/7 plumber. So let's see here. Hey, my friend asks, he is in the house, Surly Dev, ladies and gentlemen. So a round of applause for Surly Dev, the volunteer mentor who makes us look professional. Look at that. He's even got like an icon in here. Surly Dev, he's the bomb. So over on YouTube, Orbit asks, we have 5,000 plus SQL servers, and we're going to migrate to 2019 from 2016. What are the top 3 most important things that I'll consider as far as performance is concerned? Number 1 by far is 2019 compat level. Throws in all kinds of monkey wrenches like adaptive joins, batch mode execution, adaptive memory grants that make your job more challenging. So if you're having problems with parameter sniffing, make sure that you go through a thorough review of what your last parameter sniffing emergencies have been, because they're only going to get worse as you go to 2019. That for me is just the big far and away thing. The other thing I'd say is, if you have 5,000 SQL servers, I'm guessing that you don't have any control over the schema, like that you're not actually managing tables and indexes across 5,000 SQL servers. So what I would say is that a lot of the improvements that are in there are around execution plans, and it's just not going to be as interesting for you. This isn't a release where it really makes sense for people who manage thousands of servers that they're going to go, oh my God, this makes my life so much easier. There were rumors for a while there. It was shown up on stage that we were going to have availability groups in Kubernetes. The idea was that was going to make your administration easier. It didn't end up shipping with 2019, so not a lot to talk about there. Robin says, SQL availability groups, how can you say that they're broken? They work like a charm. Sure, you have to pay attention to them. I bet you've got one of those spouses. I'm not even going to go there. They may look low maintenance to you. For the rest of us, they are not low maintenance. Next up, Pete says, hi again, Brent. Is having a log ship databases to offload integrity checks still a valid idea, or are there better, easier solutions around? For me, I'm a huge fan of it, because not log shipping, but actually restoring your backups. Restoring your backups somewhere else and then running CheckDB against those, because they actually check. You haven't used it because that thing's a piece of junk. So that restoring your full backups over and doing CheckDB against it, because they really actually test your fulls, whereas if you're doing log shipping, you're only testing the logs, and your most full might actually have corruption in it. The thing that's kind of the cool kids are doing is that they offload their backups to other AG replicas, but backups and CheckDBs. Karina asked a really interesting question from over on Facebook. Why would anyone choose decimal with 0 precision instead of an integer? I have no idea, but my hunch, and I'm just guessing, like I truly don't know, but if I had to go look, is I would say, does that make a difference in terms of its compressibility or data size maybe? But I am just guessing. I don't think that I've had a situation where I've ever chose decimal in that precision, but there could be a valid reason. I just don't know what it is. And I'm intrigued too. That's kind of interesting. From YouTube, Mehul asked, apart from TDE, what other security features does SQL Server offer? Your best bet there is actually to hit books online, because there are a ton. There are certificates, server roles, all kinds of things around authentication, always encrypted, just a ton of things. So I would totally start by reading the documentation there, because the security documentation is actually pretty good. It's not bad. Oh, the cranky older gentleman says decimal can hold larger values. I like it. I would go big int. Big int would be the other thing I would do if you want larger values. But there, I'm guessing that decimal has a better compressibility than big int does, maybe. Well, no idea. Next up, Eric says, why selecting from a clustered table with only one allocated page shows 2 logical reads? Because the clustered table has a B tree, has this tree structure that has to see which leaf page to get to and where that leaf page lives. So if you want more about that, pick up any internals, a SQL Server internals book. The internals on that haven't changed much in the last 15, 20 years. And if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's the kind of thing that people read internals books for. It has no practical application in terms of SQL Server, but it's fun to go see. Next up, Fubar Hassan asks, may I know how you're showing the questions? What app are you using? It's a web app called featured.chat. Featured.chat that Surly Dev actually turned me on to. Surly Dev saw me dealing with the questions in one of these streams. And I don't know how he's related to the folks who do featured chat, like if he knows them through somewhere. But it's like the easiest way right now to go pluck multiple questions off of a Twitch stream. It only works with Twitch. So what you see us doing, both me and Surly Dev do, is we like copy paste the questions from YouTube and other channels, put them into Twitch, and then that way we have a nice little control panel here. Like you can kind of see this is the question that's up on the screen now, and then I see a queue underneath. So what Surly Dev is doing is he's copy pasting the questions from YouTube, putting them into Twitch. Then in Twitch, he can mark a little plus sign next to the ones that are good questions, and then put them into here so that, hey, Erica from Iceland, so that then I can pluck them and pick which one I want to show. It's really slick. It's totally free. I like it a lot. Featured.chat. Next up, our Carrillo Padron says, when should one use SP Blitz Who versus Atom Mechanics SP Who is active? For me, I like using SP Who is active when there is a pure emergency because it's performance tuned a whole lot better than SP Blitz Who is. I prefer using SP Blitz Who when I'm troubleshooting memory grants or when I need to write them to disk. So SP Blitz Who has a built-in output to disk feature that's really easy to use, whereas SP Who is active doesn't have any built-in functionality to log to a table. You can, it's just left as an exercise for you, the reader, to go do. Let me move I see as people are subscribing, it's kind of overlapping just a little, so let me move that over. Oh, you're welcome, Matt. Glad you like it. Next up, let's see here. Oh, wow. Vimal on YouTube asks, over on YouTube, Surly Dev, that makes me laugh every time. It's so good. When should data be moved to a historical database or data warehouse? When people are willing, it's such a good question, and people think the answer is related to performance, and it's not. The real answer is when people are willing to use a different tool to query it. because the whole performance gain that you get by forklifting the data out and moving it somewhere else, the whole gain from that is that when people want to query it, they have to go query that. If they think that they're going to query the main production database and it's just going to go grab the data over from the archives, then you didn't save anything. You're still screwed in terms of performance. But when you're willing to go get the database or get the data somewhere else with a different tool, then that's where archivals is so much more of a slam dunk. Users think they're like, I'd like to archive the data, but then I want to run the report and still see the same data. I'm like, that's not archiving, Speedy. Next up, over on YouTube, Bajan Howe says, if I have peer-to-peer transactional replication, do I still need to perform log backups? Yes, because someone may, for example, need you to rewind the database to a certain period in time. What happens, for example, if someone drops a table or issues a delete? That delete will get replicated everywhere, and then you won't have good copies of the data anywhere else. So really doing log backups is still about restores. Next up, over on YouTube, Vimal says, what is the best strategy for high availability and always available databases? The one that's the most common is failover clustering plus log shipping. Now, what is the best? That depends on what your budget and your RPO is, your RPO and RTO. So for that, if you want to learn how to pick the right one for you, go to brentozar.com and click scripts up at the top of the page. You'll go get my first responder kit, and there's a worksheet in there that helps you choose the best high availability and disaster recovery based on your budget, your willingness to be down, and your willingness to lose data. Everybody thinks that they don't want to go down or lose data until that they see the price tag on that is in the millions of dollars. You can't build an always-on solution that never loses data using a can of Pringles and a 2x4. It actually takes real money. Next up, over on YouTube, Altair asks, sometimes I see some processes on SQL Server showing no waits with runnable status and just hanging and doing nothing. Imagine that you go to SQL Server and you type begin tran, hit execute, and then you walk away. Another example is, say that you go and run a select, you start a begin tran, run a select, that would totally do it. Or if SQL Server is somehow waiting on you for your next command. That's my guess as to what's happening. Hi, Geronimo. Next up, Bo Jingles says, related to your enjoyment of being drunk, what's your favorite rye whiskey? I am not as fond of brown liquors these days just because they just don't do my stomach very well. I always wake up like regretting it the next day, and it's less about a hangover, it's more about intestinals. When I do drink brown liquids, it tends to be Four Roses single barrel bourbon, and I like the high rye version of that. So they have Four Roses has single barrel with different levels of rye, and I like the high rye version of that. You asked me about rye whiskey. That is a wonderful coincidence that I like high rye bourbon, but folks who are watching that don't think that I know a lot about liquor, because I don't. Other than it's tequila, mezcals, I know a lot about clear liquors, but for some reason the brown ones just don't agree with me very often. Next up, Shrikant says, sometimes my app fails to regain connection via a listener. I think I see the problem is that you have a terrible network connection. It's dropping letters all the time. Looks like it's even like breaking your shift key. So make sure to go get that network connection fixed so that way you'll be able to see like every frame of my incoming video. I won't look so garbled. It'll make your life way easier when you start getting that fixed. Next up, Bob the Lobster. Welcome back. Bob the Lobster says, I'm about to start a new job that includes separating one organization into two. Divorces suck. Any tips? Oh, politics. Oh, man. Dealing with Active Directory and domain splits. Oh, when I first went through the Microsoft Certified Master Program like 10 years ago, there was a Microsoft Certified Master Program for all the different products. There was like for Active Directory, for Exchange, there were all these different ones. And when I first heard there was one for Active Directory, I was like, wait, how can you be a Microsoft certified master of Active Directory? Oh, how naive I was. Wow, it is so complicated. I sat and just listened to like an hour of them talking, and I'm like, oh my God, yeah, this is truly terrible. So no tips for that. I completely respect that. That is genuinely hard work. Next up, Brian asks, we have a system with a lot of inactive and a few active databases, K-Cura Relativity. How can we determine if the server's getting maxed out on resources, needing a new SQL Server? Attend my Mastering Server Tuning class or Fundamentals of Server Tuning class. Either of those will teach you how to measure a SQL Server and know with real numbers whether the thing is getting maxed out or not, all involving around like wait-time ratio and measuring it with monitoring tools or SP Blitz first. So there you go for that. Next up, Orange Peel 99, I love it, says, I'm just starting my database lecture this semester. Any advice for me? I'm not clear based on that question whether you're teaching or whether you're attending. If you're teaching, I would say, make it as real for the students with something that they care about as you can. Like use demo data that the kids are into. Me, I'm old, but from what little I know about kids, they really seem to be into TikTok. I say that because I am also into TikTok. So what I would say is if you're going to do a demo database, try to make it around, say, for example, TikTok videos, subscribing to different people, following different people. That'll make it much more real for them so that when they look at TikTok, they're like, oh, that makes sense. I see where the numbers are coming from. If you're paying attention, like if you're the student instead of the teacher, I would look at everywhere around where you see a number. Think about where that data lives. Think about who owns it. For example, when you're looking right here at Twitch, every single thing that you see, Twitch, YouTube, any of that, every time you see pieces of strings of data up here, numbers, any of that, it lives somewhere, and it's so neat to see who has custody of it and like what that chain of custody looks like. Animal Crossing, it's another good example of a database there. Like everything is databases. It's just utterly amazing. And if you like that kind of thing, like if you look around and it's just all numbers everywhere and you're just entranced with it, you will love data as a career because it's freaking everywhere and everyone wants to track all of their data and they all want it to go faster, which is just kind of amazing. Next up, Richie says, when are you going to start playing Among Us? This is Twitch. I seriously want to do a game in front of y'all. I got to find the right timing and whatnot. Right now, things are a total frenzy with the Black Friday sales that are going on. But as soon as the Black Friday stuff is over, I have like tons of open time. Mid-December, we're going to Cabo, Mexico to our we're going to Cabo, Mexico for a while, but after that, when we come back, I think I'm probably going to try and see if I can put that together, because I would have so much fun. Among Us looks amazing. I love it. That's exactly the kind of thing that I love. I don't want to get good at like sniping people. I'm just not that into it. But, oh, Richie, I don't have a sound effect for dings on here, and like you and I will be the only ones who get that, but it would be absolutely hilarious. Chris says, will you get a sombrero this time in Cabo? I might. I know our internet connection sucks at the hotel because we've been there before, but I would love to either record a video with it just sitting out in the hot tub. Toby says it's more about deceiving people. Exactly. Which, as someone who works with the SQL Server Query Optimizer all the time, I am very good at spotting deceptions. Negu over on YouTube says, what are the most probable cause from the wildcard certs or from third parties are missing in SQL Server Configuration Manager for binding? Wow, I have no idea. I never thought of that. What I would do is I would go ask that over at dba.stackexchange.com because it is such a narrow topic and there's probably only half a dozen people in the world who know the answer to that. But at least with dba.stackexchange, we can get visibility to it. When you post it at dba.stackexchange.com, if you don't get a good answer within 2 or 3 days, email me the link. don't email me right away. I don't have the time for it. But if you don't get a good answer in 2 or 3 days, then email it to me and I'll raise it out in my social networks to make sure that it gets the exposure that it wants. Because it is an interesting question. I love the question and I understand the mechanics of what you're asking. I just don't know the answer. So now I'm intrigued too. Next up, Madivan says over on YouTube, we have a requirement to use multiple databases in Azure, and data needs to be accessed from each other in real time. What's the best way to handle this? Azure SQLDB managed instances. Azure SQLDB managed instances are designed for exactly that. You asked what the best method is. The best method is that. Anything else is a crappy method. So. Next up, Deslov asks, in your live class season pass, do you cover any topics unrelated to how to design a database? No, that's such a good question. I don't. I think it's kind of universal regardless of what database you're using. I think it doesn't really matter whether you're using MySQL or Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server or Postgres or even stuff like DynamoDB. There are some universal things that you need to be aware of. It's much more appropriate for a college course. What I would do is go to YouTube and look for college courses on that topic because there are going to be a bunch of them available and they're totally free. I actually like making money. I know, I'm kind of weird. So I don't do things where I have to compete with people who have free resources. And I'd rather just give you the free resources. So we're done with that. So there you go. Next up, Jan says, what is your opinion of storing time series data in SQL Server? I think that SQL Server is a really expensive way to do that, and I would probably focus on one of the open source time series databases that are totally free because they're going to be specialized for it. They're used to that use case. It'll have a vibrant community around it. So focus on a time series database rather than trying to put everything in the freezer. Next up, Anthony says, question on SQL Server in a failover cluster. I have 3 nodes in a cluster with 8 instances running on 2012. Is this still good an idea for SQL Server 2019? So me personally, I think that that's a clown car. So I have a lot of problems with doing performance troubleshooting or patching in a situation like that. Because often people go, I can only be on this version. I can only be on this version. You got your peanut butter in my plan cache. You got mine. So in order to reduce the gunfights, this is a perfect situation for virtualization. So either VMware, Hyper-V, whatever your particular fetish is, I would go there rather than I would a bare metal cluster, just to reduce the politics and the performance troubleshooting problems. Does it work? Sure. It's just harder to troubleshoot is all it is. But I'm fine with it. Like I wouldn't go, oh, you're an idiot for doing that. No, it's not a bad solution. It's just I would prefer virtualization myself. That's my fetish. Next up, Kevin says, why do DAC packs sometimes rebuild tables and indexes when nothing has changed? Because they're garbage. Garbage is a strong word. It's just not very good. I'm just not a fan of DAC packs. I've never seen people be successful with that at scale. They have some, they're like, it hardly works, it mostly hardly kind of sort of works at all. And I'm like, yeah, no, we're not playing that game. Next up, the Almighty Beard. That's nice. I like that. The Almighty Beard says, sometimes I see in who is active a query just running for a few milliseconds as being the blocker for others who are running for far more time. How can a query block that doesn't touch the same tables? Oh, sure, I'll show it to you. So let's go over into SQL Server Management Studio. Oh, I didn't even have it launched up. So I am going to have 2 windows in SSMS. I'm going to have like a left-hand window and a right-hand window eventually when it starts. Microsoft wonders why we complain about the length of time that it takes SQL Server Management Studio to start. It's unbelievable how that thing works. So we'll fire up 2 queries. I will get 2 queries over in 2 separate windows. Get these situated around just right. I'm going to put them both over in the Stack Overflow database. So you're over there and you're over there. Over in the left-hand side, I'm going to say begin tran, update DBO users, set reputation equals 1,000,000 points. where ID equals 26,837. That's my own account in Stack Overflow. I'm going to execute that. Over on the left-hand side, what I've done is I've taken out a lock on the users table. Then, over on the right-hand side, I'm going to say select star from DBO users, where ID equals 26,837. When I execute that, over on the right-hand side, oh, let me move this around just a little so that you can see it a little better. And get you over here like this. So over here on the right-hand side, this query is obviously blocked by that query over on the left. Like everybody would get when you run SP who is active, what the blocking chain looks like. Over in SP who is active, over on the left, the begin tran is the one that's blocking the select. This is what a normal blocking chain looks like. But let's do something a little bit different. Over on the left-hand side, let's say select star from, or we'll do count star. Select count star from DBO posts. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to run that, and then over on the right, I'm going to run my select again, and I'm going to run SP who is active. Now, this is going to look really weird. It looks like the select that's trying to get my info is waiting on a lock from a query that's doing a select on a totally different table. Well, the reason why is all you're seeing in SP who is active is the last query someone ran, not the first query someone ran. The thing that'll help you troubleshoot it a little bit better is if you say get locks equals 1. If you say get locks equals 1, this returns an additional column over here in SP who is active called locks, and then you can go click on that and understand what locks each session holds and which locks it wants. But so there's the answer to your question there. I'll go ahead and stop that one and roll back my transaction just so that I got that done. And then here we'll move this little Streamlabs piece around, move that ops box over there, and then we'll come back over to here. Next up, we have Arcario Padron says, do you have any suggestions or tools on how to scramble a database? We have multiple small databases. I have a blog post for that. If you search for mask data, Brent Ozar, mask, you know, like the mask data, Brent Ozar, I have a whole blog post on that, and I explain why it's challenging and why tools suck so bad. At the end of the post, kind of the takeaway from it is, hey, in the comments, if you found a solution, please elaborate on it below. And there's a whole lot of talking, and nobody has a solution. So it's why it's just a little bit challenging. Next up, Vimal says from over on YouTube, are SQL Server query plans a good idea for performance tuning even if you have other third-party tools available? Yes. Next question. Let's see here. Ganesharam says, why is an identity column not reset in a table when it is rolled back? Because identities aren't like something where every number has to be used. They're just an always ascending number. It's not like there's a guarantee that they're all going to line up. Because think, for example, you could delete a row, and that's going to cause holes in an identity too. Identities will also jump when you fail over a cluster from one node to another. It's just they never guaranteed that there's not going to have holes in them. So. Next up, Andre says, how can we combine curl commands with SQL? That strikes me as a hell of a bad idea. SQL Server is a really expensive place to use as an app server. If you want to get URL data, like if you want to go fetch an API, go use an app server. That's what app servers are for. They're great at that. There's no licensing cost to them. But generally, I would try recommending don't use CPU resources on SQL Server unless you have to. Because remember, Standard Edition is $2,000 US per core. Enterprise Edition is $7,000 US per core. Your application servers, carry the one, are $0 per core. Focus on that. Next one, Athmo2 says, do you happen to know what your desk's dimensions are? Width and depth, it looks very spacious. So it's funny you mentioned that. I was just looking at that this past weekend because we're moving to Iceland and I'm like measuring out everything to see whether we can fit our stuff in a shipping container. The thing is with this desk, this is a Next Desk like Terra Desk Pro or something like that. If you, I want to say Next Desk Terra Desk Pro. If you Google for that, you'll find it. And they only make two sizes. They make regular and extra wide, and I got the extra wide version. If I remember right, it's like 80 inches long. I was just a fan of, I want lots of open space so that if I need to set something down on my desk, it doesn't look cluttered. So like if I need to do an update on on my laptop or something, that I can put it down there and it doesn't look hellaciously big. Or it just says ship it. So it's pretty big. It's like 72 or 80 inches wide. Like it's whatever it's the biggest desk that they sell was. I wouldn't do that again. I wouldn't do it. Takes up a lot of space in the room, but once you buy it. Gallenbunga says, I like your penguins. They're puffins, actually. And these are so cool. These are from Iceland. I guess I got to go over here. They have little magnetic heads. They have little magnetic heads, so you can move their heads around and pose them in different positions. Starts to sound dirty, but it is what it is. Okay, so we only have 40 minutes left because I have a hard stop at 7:30 a.m. my time. My wife is going to wake up and we're going to go prep for the people who come here with the mattress. So just FYI, if you want to get your questions in, get them in now because we're going to shut down questions here in a couple of minutes. Have I tried smoked puffins? Yes, I did. My wife was not happy about that. I tend to eat anything that's available. I'll give it a shot and see, but I did try it. I didn't think it was worth buying again to kill them, just because they're such adorable animals, but I didn't have that big of a problem with it. Oh my. Next up, Mike Shaw, as in Mr. Pam Shaw, but Mike Shaw. We support a third-party app which uses a SQL login to authenticate to the database. We've had users, what in the Sam hell? How can I make sure the login is only used by an app? So firewalls are really good here because they can do the combination of the login plus the IP that it's coming from. You could technically try to do that over in a login trigger. You could examine things like if the login is this and the machine name is this, then it's accepted. But if it's any other machine, deny it. Just be really careful with the logic that you put in a login trigger because it can end up causing people not to be able to log into the SQL Server. There's a startup trace flag that you can use that will bypass login triggers in case you get into that kind of trouble. Let's see here. Let's say next up, John says over on YouTube, sanity check, this is my last go, 2016 Enterprise Windows Failover Cluster. I never, ever, 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 ever upgrade in place. Never. Never, period, full stop. I know you're not supposed to say never. I never do that because there's no rollback. You have no rollback plan in case something goes wrong. I have seen so many upgrades go wrong. I would just never do that ever, period. Next up, Pete says over on YouTube, question number 2. I'll allow it. So a common one, what are ways to improve the speed of backups? The first easiest way is stripe your backup across 4 files. SQL Server has internal implementation problems that mean the more files that you have, the faster it will go to an extent. As long as your backup target supports it, it's very common to see people use 4 or 8 data files and suddenly get 4 times, 6 times faster throughput. Setting that aside, other than that, it all comes down to, is the bottleneck reading data or writing data? To find out, do a backup to null. If you search for backup to null SQL Server, and null only has 1 L in it, strangely. I mean, the word generally has 2 L's, but when you look for backup to null, it's 1 L. And that will do a backup just by reading full speed, but discard the data. It doesn't actually write anything. So that tells you how fast your throughput is for the reads, and then that helps you figure out whether you have a read problem or a write problem. Next up, Chris says, can you update us on Helmet, please? Folks, too, just as an FYI, if you ask a question twice, what I do is I just block you over on YouTube or Twitch, just so that it doesn't keep cluttering up inside here. So just only ask your question once. You wouldn't want to be blocked just that quickly from that. CGS says, can you update us on Helmet, please? Have you broken his speedometer? This morning's task is actually getting him shipped to Iceland, is getting quotes and all that. So what we're trying to do is figure out if we're going to just do one shipping container and put the cars and the car and the furniture inside there, or if we're going to try and do like separate containers, how that's going to work. But having a great time running him all over the West Coast. I haven't driven him that hard recently. I was trying to figure out whether or not I was going to replace his, long story. I should probably stop there. There's parts of his operation that are not entirely above the law, but it's in very good fun. Kevin asks, what are some good ways to track what changes have been deployed to which environments? There's kind of a standard for this in the industry, Redgate Schema Compare. Redgate Schema Compare is a for-pay piece of software that can be automated with all kinds of commands. Like you can use it with PowerShell, and you can quickly compare two servers against each other, two databases against each other. It'll generate change scripts. As far as I know, that's like the one big monster in the industry. There may be others, but that's the one that I would just go straight for, because it is so easy to see. Spectre says, I think I found the perfect Twitch channel. Just wait until the after hours show and I start. Spectre says, I think I found the perfect Twitch channel. Hi, Brent. I'm new here in my first year comping. Poor Surly Dev is having to deal with something going on the Twitch channel for spamming. So let's go find that out. I can block people. Let's go mute that, and then I can real quick see if I can block people. How does this work inside here? Manage moderators. So let's see here. I think I can make Surly Dev a moderator. Let's see. Community approved users. Let's see here. Channel URL. Let me see how this works. Surly Dev, can I get his... oh, no, add moderator. There we go. Surly Dev is now a moderator for your YouTube channel. Ha, 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 ha. Let's see here. Daniel, I'll go ahead and block this person. Remove and block them. So hide this user on this channel. There we go. And 90S, we'll hide that user on this channel. There we go. And there's the end of that. Woohoo! That's the end of that. So let's close that out here, leave, and then come back over here. So Spectre had said, hello, Brent. In my first year of computer engineering, how should I start learning databases or SQL? The good thing is because databases and SQL are so like world standard and have been around for so long, I would just seriously go pick up a book and be like, as I have Van Hammer, yeah. I would pick up any book on databases, like how to get started with databases, and don't worry about like the name or whatever or who wrote it. Just pick any book and just see if you like the tone of the book. The other thing I would pick up, if you're interested in learning Postgres, there is a course, an online course called A Curious Moon. And this is really neat. So if you search for A Curious Moon Postgres, it has a training channel. John says, oh, add me as a mod. No, that's not how this works. If I don't know you in real life, you're not becoming a moderator. Even if I know you in real life, you're probably not becoming a moderator. This is an amazing course. It's pretty slick as a getting started database tutorial. Teaches you how to get started with Postgres. So very cool. Coming back over here. Next up, Sabiu says, question for me, have you ever worked with SAP Business One before? I have. Do you know about any tuning possible in SQL Server to make it run faster? It's been so long. It's probably been 10 years since I worked with SAP Business One, so I wouldn't be able to tell you instantly. I just don't know it off the top of my head, but great question. I don't have something off the top of my head, though. The thing with SAP is it's so freaking expensive that you're going to find consultants who specialize in it, and they're going to hide their knowledge under a mattress. Like they tend to want to keep it quiet because they think if they share their knowledge with you that they're not going to get paid anymore. It's not as open and welcoming as the SQL Server community, so I understand why you're having a tough time finding info on that. Next up, Anthony says, have you supported a Sybase ASC server? No. So there you go. Next up, Douglas says over on YouTube, talking about RPO and RTO, should we stick with native backups or move a third-party agent backup like Commvault? The thing is, with third-party backup utilities, where you see them tends to be in, so let's think about small shops to giant shops. So think from like a mom and pop dentist office, companies going all the way to like Exxon. If you think about mom and pop offices, they don't have a full-time database administrator. They like tools like Veeam, Zerto, Data Domain, whatever, things that are just off-the-shelf appliances that they can buy to back up everything. Then as companies get larger, they tend to have a database administrator who's responsible personally for all of the backups of SQL Server. So you start to segue back into native backups. Then as you get to the very larger tiers, you know, you think like the Exxon, General Motors, Renault, big, huge, giant companies. And I say these names, they're not my clients. Big companies don't hire like independent people. But when you, Ultra Legends, you are out of here. So off you go. When you get to the larger companies, then you get to the point where there's a separate team that just handles backups and security, and that's where you also tend to see the very large folks focused on backup utilities. In the middle, you tend to see more database administrators doing it with natives. Next up, let's see here, T-Mad Hammer. Kind of cool. It's kind of like the Mad Hatter, but Mad Hammer. I think you've answered before, but I can't find it. Random times my stored procedure will take forever. To fix it, I open and close it and it runs fine. I think it's the plan cache. So what the issue is called parameter sniffing. And as soon as you know that's what the issue is, like when you hear the term parameter sniffing, you're going to go Google for it and you're going to find a ton of answers. Like I have a 1-day class on the fundamentals of parameter sniffing and a 3-day class on mastering parameter sniffing. And it just so happens they're on sale this week. So they're on sale this week on my annual Black Friday sale. You can go over to brentozar.com/Black Friday. I'll like sneak out of here. You can go sneak over to brentozar.com/Black Friday and you can go see the sales over there. Oh, I should change my white balance now that you can't see me. You'll see the sales over there, and then you can learn about the fundamentals of parameter sniffing and mastering parameter sniffing. That's over at brentozar.com/Black Friday. Because I want to take all the money from your wallet. That's not entirely true. I only want to take some of it. Next up, Erica from Iceland asks, whoops, let's switch over here to the one where you can see the questions. Erica from Iceland asks, you mentioned a few times the performance difference between the different versions and releases. Have you compiled any info or tests on the subject? The problem is, if you read the licensing agreement for SQL Server, you're not allowed to publish benchmarks without the written approval of Microsoft. I agree. I think it's a brilliant thing inside their licensing. I would do the same thing if I was them. Because the problem is you get some amateur hour out there going, doing benchmarks that are wrong, and then Microsoft has to go get involved with it, and it's a giant resource problem for their site. So Techie, I'll go ahead and block you there, and we're out of there. Bayesian says too much light. Am I too bright for you? Is that what the problem is? So that's why you don't see a lot of info or tests out on the subject, just because it does get you in trouble with Microsoft if you do it. Next up, let's see here. Oh, Erica again. Erica says, one path of code performance for tuning code is, goodness gracious. So I am going to go ahead and we're blocking people like crazy in here, aren't we? Oh, we got all kinds of things. Fun, let's only ask our questions once, so then that way they'll go over into the stream. And we'll just go ahead and no more questions from here on out. What I'll do is I'll only answer the questions that are already there. That way I can just knock out the remainder list. There's a ton in the list, and that'll carry us through the end of the time as well. Erica says, one path of code performance tuning is logic complexity reduction. Try, Andreas, let's not, all right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just hide the chat altogether. So that's how that's going to go today too. So let's go move that around and change that. All right, there we go. So now I can just work through the questions. One path of code performance is logic complexity reduction, reducing the logic paths of the plan, not necessarily the operators in the execution plan. Any thoughts? This is kind of beyond what I can do quickly inside here. You're on the right track, and I go into that in my mastering query tuning class, but it's beyond what I can do justice to here quickly, unfortunately. Next, let's see here. We have Atreus. I am planning to migrate from SQL Server on premises up to Azure. Are there pros and cons about using managed instances over a standard installation? Yes. The big one is write throughput. How fast you can write and ingest data into things like the transaction log. I actually keep a USB thumb drive here on my desk for that very reason, to often remind folks what storage is like these days. If you go up into the cloud, this USB 3 thumb drive is extremely competitive with like a $20, $30, $40,000 per month managed instance. So you want to be very keenly aware of how much you're writing to the transaction log. That by far and away is the big deal. Because it's so cheap these days to get really fast enterprise-grade solid-state storage locally. It's so cheap on premises, and then it's so expensive up in the cloud. It's bananas. Next up, Bajan House says, if my transaction log size is ballooning due to transactional replication, is it possible to shrink the log file down to its original defined size? And should we do it? Only if you're going to get rid of replication. Otherwise, if you shrink the log file back down, it's just going to grow back up again. It's just a matter of time. So you're not saving anything by shrinking it down. Because when you grow that thing back out, that's a blocking operation. It's going to slow down insert, update, and delete transactions. So whatever the size is, I would recommend leaving it there. It's totally normal for the log file to be 25% of the walk like a transaction log, to be 25% of the database size. So if you have, say, a 100 gig database, it's totally normal for the transaction log to be like 25 gigs in size. If you wanted to tune it, you can look at going to SQL Server 2019. They have a new feature called Accelerated Database Recovery that will help minimize the size of the transaction log. It's not necessarily going to help here with transactional replication, but it'll help with other problems you're running into that may cause the log file size to grow. Drop Table Employee says, I remember reading bad things about the merge statement in 2012 and 2014. Have there been any improvements to it? No. Microsoft basically closed all of the bugs as won't fix. So if you search for merge Aaron Bertrand, he has a big, huge MS SQL tips post that explains the problems with the merge statement and links you over to Microsoft's knowledge base articles on the problems with them for each one of the bugs, showing that it's marked as won't fix, which kind of blows. Next up, we have Adam says, we have a really good SQL Server plugin for time series at work. I just can't remember what it's called, but in our scenario, we already use SQL Server for other things. Yeah, I mean, I think that's how SQL Server kind of gets its tentacles. Wanted to work that word into a stream for a while. How it gets its tentacles into organizations is you start using it for relational database, and then you're like, well, it also works for this. And then next thing you know, you've got it storing absolutely everything, and you can't find an easy way out of there. So it works. I'm just less wild about it. Next up, Razvan says, when I'm querying an XML column and I have multiple rows, so SQL Server isn't very performance tuned at XML. It'll work, it's just not very fast. So if when you get to the point where you're needing to performance tune the results that come out of an XML query, you probably want to persist that data to real relational columns so that you can sort them easier. Whether you do it at the time of insert, like parsing it with a trigger, or whether you go back later with an application server and more normalize the data. But if you're going to do relational queries, don't leave it in XML. That's not a good tool for SQL Server, and it's not getting any better. So, oh, I have to show Restream because I have to show the chat because Galambunga has tentacles. Woo! Nicely done. Very nicely done. Yes, he is a real boy. A round of applause for Surly Dev, who keeps me absolutely sane on this stream by moderating the myriad of y'all's crazy Wonko questions. Next up, let's see here. Chanjivi says, over on YouTube, can you explain deadlocks and how does SQL Server handle that? Well, imagine that you and I are sitting at the dining room table. That you and I are both sitting at the dining room table, and I pick up the fork because I'm going to start eating my whatever it is that we have. And then you pick up your knife because you're going to start cutting whatever it is that you have. And I say, hey, could you pass me the knife? I need to cut my broccoli. And you're like, yeah, as soon as I'm done with it. Hey, in the meantime, can you pass me your fork? And I'm like, well, as soon as I'm done with it. I have the fork. I want your knife. You have the knife. You want my fork. Now, in a normal world, you and I would talk to each other and we would come to an agreement. Like, I would see that you have a gun, and I'd be like, oh, why don't you take the fork for a while? In SQL Server, there's no inter-process communication, so we can't see between queries as to who's more intimidating. So SQL Server just waits, and every 5 seconds it wakes up, looks for that scenario, and it kills whatever query is going to be the easiest to roll back. Also, you should have just given me the knife, so we wouldn't have had this problem. Next up. Samir says, my mind works in really strange ways. Samir says, can I have a SQL Server? I came with a knife to a gunfight. Can I have a SQL Server database with unequal rows or columns? Oh, wow. Oh, neat. Oh, what you're asking for is like where NoSQL comes from. NoSQL wants to be able to have loosely structured data. You can kind of sort of do that by storing XML or JSON data inside SQL Server, but it's not a really good idea. If you want differently structured rows and columns, check into a NoSQL database because they're much more specialized in that kind of thing. But that's exactly where NoSQL comes from. Next up, Coolstead says, I have multiple SQL servers on multiple independent domains, and I've just started looking into central management servers. Are there any definitive resources on using CMS? Yes, if you go to Amazon or your favorite bookseller and search for central management server, there's a book on them that was written by, I want to say Jorge Segarra, back like 10 years ago when they first came out. That was kind of the end of it, though. After that, people just didn't write about them at all. So start there. Start with the book on central management servers. The other thing is dbatools.io. dbatools.io is a PowerShell framework, and they also use central management servers. So there'll be resources inside there that you can leverage. Next up, thanks for the follow, Jonas. Welcome to the club. If anyone wants to subscribe to the channel or follow me, whatever, then you get notifications every time I do a stream. I will do a stream tomorrow morning, too, at the same time. I'll continue doing another office hours stream tomorrow, and I'll actually pick up with all the questions that are in the queue there at whenever I need to leave here in about 15 minutes. So that way you can come back and see if your question gets answered then. Next up, Shrikant over on YouTube asks, any options to run SP Blitz cache or SP Blitz query store that takes a plan handle and shows compiled parameter values of the plan? Not the plan handle, but the query hash. So if you know the query hash, you can totally do it. If you look at SP Blitz cache, there's an only query hashes option. Check that one out. So SP Blitz cache, only query hashes. Next up, Jurian says, we do calculations with nested views, and then we store the results of 50 plus views in one table. What the what? Storing process takes 45 minutes, 90 minutes. Is nested views good or are there better ways? I I I don't think that's really what I would by the time you get to a point where there's a process and it's taking an hour and you want to tune it, that's usually a good time to step back and go, wait a minute, are we doing this in the right thing? What you're doing there is called ETL, extract, transform, and load. Like you're changing the structures of tables to make them more normalized for reporting. You're building a data mart or a data warehouse. The best tools for that job aren't T-SQL. The better things for that job are things like SQL Server integration services or Azure Data Factory. So I would be a bad consultant if I didn't say, hey, we're trying to hammer things 300 times per second, what should we do? And I'm like, oh, you don't want a hammer, you want a nail gun that's designed for that kind of thing. So that's where I would kind of start. Next up, oh, wow. Yagi on YouTube asks, are cursors still used in modern SQL? Yes, when there are operations that you can't perform in a set. I'll give you an example. Backing up databases. There is no backup database command that backs up the entire SQL server. You have to do looping to go through each database that you have. So that's a great example of something where we just don't have a choice. If you do have a choice, I would advise you not to use cursors. But they're still used when there's literally no other choice. Jothan, remember, we're only going to ask the questions once. Don't copy paste them repeatedly. When you copy paste them repeatedly, we will ban you. Thank you. Then next up, Jen says, will you move back for Iceland or will you stay there forever? It's a really good question. So when Erica and I first started planning this about 7 months ago, earlier this year, when we came back due to coronavirus, we were over in Iceland when the coronavirus thing hit, and then we flew back to the States because I had a bunch of in-person work still scheduled in the States. We didn't know how bad the quarantine was going to be. When we came back here, the first thing we were like is we want to go there for an extended period of time. We wanted to go there for 3 months, 6 months. Every time we've gone to Iceland, we've wanted to go there longer and longer. Will we come back? It's really going to depend on how the first year or two goes. We're committed to be doing there for at least 1 year, maybe 2 years. We'll see how it goes. And depending on how things go, what we're kind of looking at doing is buying a house over there and then having just a house in Iceland and then a house back here in California so that we could split our time going back and forth. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I'm getting old, and there will come a time when I want to retire because I'm sick and tired of your question queue. That's totally not true. I enjoy the question queue, but it's the challenge, as you can see here with the questions piece, is really moderating. Thank God for Surly Deb, but it's so tough to deal with just the spammers and the people who want to ask the same question over and over again. So it's just super frustrating. King Coconut Crab, nice name, says Iceland is beautiful. I had to move back as well, but I miss it. Now Norway is just as good. I like all the Scandinavian countries. Really, I love Europe a lot. And it's not that I don't like the States. I love the States. The United States is amazing. Sure, we have our problems. Every country has their problems. But it's an amazing land of opportunity. The people are fantastic. People are bad everywhere, but people are fantastic. The geography is gorgeous. There are so many places with amazing weather. There's so many places that I love in the United States. So like Richie's in South Florida, like the Miami area. Erica and I lived there for a couple of years. If she passed away, I could totally see myself living in Miami or South Beach again for a while because it's a lot of fun. King Coconut Crab says people are very direct in the USA. It depends on where you go. Like New York, Brooklyn, they are very direct, very straight to the point. You get to the Midwest, like Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan, people are very polite and roundabout, kind of like British folks. Pete says, will you come visit Scotland, UK more when you're in Iceland? No. The whole idea of Iceland is to be remote and isolated from people, is that I don't want to be touchy-feely with you people. I would like to be all alone, by myself. All by myself. Manish says, how do you see the future of commercial database engines? Postgres can probably be a replacement, and the cost is quite less. Why would someone use SQL Server when Postgres is available at a less cost? Oh, great question. Performance. So there are things that SQL Server can do for performance that Postgres can't. Parallelism, it's a classic example. For 20 years, SQL Server has automatically parallelized all kinds of queries, and Postgres is still like on its starter training wheels for that. They're like just getting started with parallelism. Tel Aviv is, I love Israel. Israel's phenomenal. I love the people, the food, the culture. I've been to Tel Aviv 2 times now, 2 times Jerusalem, all that, and just loved it. It was just fantastic. The people are great. Israelis are some of my favorite people in the world. So yeah, I totally agree on that one. My wife gets really nervous though when I go to Israel because, of course, there's some, this world's powder keg is all right inside there. So it's all kinds of fun, dramatic tensions. But I'm like, oh, everyone should see it before they die. It's just amazing. Then we'll do one more query before we bail. When creating automation for SQL Server, which one is better, PowerShell or Python? For me, and I don't do either, but here's what I see it from the outside. PowerShell is all about Windows. Python is about all kinds of things. Python will probably get you more jobs long term. PowerShell is more Windows Enterprise, so big Exxon, GM, Ford, big, huge, giant companies that want to do Windows automation. If you want to do Windows scripting for the rest of your life, which is fine, some people's fetish, it's not my fetish, then PowerShell would be a better fix. If you want to leave yourself more career options going forward, especially in data, Python is more of a language for different operating systems, databases, glue, data science, etc. So I would go that way more than I would probably go PowerShell. Yahor says PowerShell will now work on Linux as well. It's true. The 3 people who are using it are extremely impressed. That's going to be I think it's amazing. All right, so that is it for today. I am going to go wearing it's like traveling, right? CW train is like how we get our traveling. Thanks for hanging out with me today, y'all. And if I didn't get your question answered, show up tomorrow, and we'll do another office hours tomorrow around the same time. I am going to go get some breakfast on before I have to go help my wife. We got to go move the mattress out of the bedroom so that she can vacuum underneath the mattress. She's really like anal retentive about that kind of thing. We would have probably entire herds of dust bunnies if I was involved, but so we're going to go move the mattress out so that they can go replace it with the new one, and off we go. So adios, and I will see y'all later.